So welcome everyone. We'll be getting started in about 2 minutes or so. It's about 2 to the top of the hour. Welcome to the new folks that are joining us for the first session, and the returners, thank you for your dedicating a portion of your day to us here. I'll be turning things over to Bill Noto, who's going to be the moderator for this session. So enjoy the rest of your 55 minutes with us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the session today. We're going to be talking about protecting critical endpoints in manufacturing. We've got a great panel today of experts ready to share their insights on this topic. I'd like to introduce briefly the folks we have with us. Patrick Wall, Senior Global Security Architect, Center of Excellence at Linde, with degrees in Electrical Engineering and Computer Information Systems and 25 years at Praxair Linde. Pat leads research and development, building experimental pilot plants, instrumentation, data acquisition, and control systems. He's experienced in both IT and OT security. We have Martin Diaz, the Director of OT Security Practice at NTT. Martin brings an MBA from NYU School of Business, Stern, 22 years in industrial control systems, process control, and automation, and shares a background at GE with me. And he also has spent time at Schneider. He's been with NTT for 3 years, developing the OT security consulting services there. He's got certifications in EDR, OT, IDS, EC Council, and ISA IEC 62443. My friend Rick Peters, the CISO for operational technology at Fortinet, brings more than 37 years of cybersecurity experience working across foreign, domestic, and commercial industry sectors at the National Security Agency. Rick's also led development of cyber capabilities across endpoint, infrastructure, and industrial control system technologies at the agency. At Fortinet, as our OT CISO, Rick delivers cybersecurity defense solutions and insights for the OT critical infrastructure environments with customers across North America. I'm William Noto, Bill Noto, the Director of Product Marketing for Fortinet. I focus on OT here. I have an MBA from UMass Eisenberg. And before joining Fortinet about a year ago, I spent 12 years at General Electric, at GE Wind, and GE Digital, working on SCADA systems, security, OT security products, and industrial Internet of Things platforms. And really happy to have our esteemed panelists together today. Thank you for bearing with me on the introductions, everybody. Let's jump into it. So when we talk about endpoint detection in manufacturing, and that's what the whole focus of this call is today. The whole webinar is going to be about endpoint detection in manufacturing. Which endpoints do we count as needing protection? And Martin, if you would you lead off?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. And that's actually a great. I believe that question deserves a two-part answer. The first is a very kind of a simple, really looking at what are the most critical assets that are found in the OT networks, especially when we look at engineering workstations, servers, HMIs, for instance. Those will probably be, but again, as I mentioned, I believe that deserves a two answer. The second answer is really, what is the use case and what is the kind of infrastructure or network having the installations? It's not the same to have a flat network with not even a firewall in between IT and OT, compared to a robust, more mature network where they might have a layer defense in depth architecture. So, but to that end, we have seen new endpoints make it into the OT manufacturing, especially mobile devices, tablets, And so, going back to the answer, what we recommend is to really have customers to look into their environment and really understand what is the criticality and what devices are more exposed. So that's, in my opinion, those devices which will require to have a specific monitoring in their system.
Great, thank you. And Martin, I don't know why, I don't know if it was just me, but I heard a little bit of static while you were talking. It sounded like it might be the connection. It kind of wasn't terrible, but just letting you know. What I heard you saying though was critical servers, HMIs, engineering workstations, and we also have tablets and laptops coming on the scene as well. It's important to focus on what are the most crucial systems in the process. Pat, how about you? Did you want to add a perspective as well?
Well, for us, we drew the line at control, and we, anything that is specific to plant control or could be used to gain influence over the control of the plant was what we deemed as needing protection.
Got it. Thanks, Pat. Great. So let's jump into the next one. And actually, before we get to our next question, we're going to do our first poll. So let's ask the audience. We have a great turnout today, over 200 people. So please take a minute and just answer this poll if you can. What type of control systems do you use in your environment? So give everyone a minute for that. All right, let's see the results. So can everyone see the results, or is it just me? I'll read them just in case. It looks like 32% said don't know, 57% said PLC slash HMI, and 11% said DCS. That's about what I would have expected. So thanks, everyone. So the majority of PLCs and HMIs are what people are seeing in manufacturing. So what are some of the hurdles or limiting factors when implementing protection of endpoints for control systems? Pat, I'd like to have you lead us off.
Sure. For us, it was a kind of a mixed bag, if you will, of limiting factors and hurdles. We had some pretty large concerns with DCS vendors, vendors such as Siemens, Emerson with their Delta V Pro platform. They have very strict policies in terms of what Windows updates you can use. They approve all of these things. And then they also have very specific requirements in terms of anti-malware platforms. So we had our desire for a lot of reasons was to pursue the direction of FortiEDR, and actually in silo at the time. And this, we had to go through extensive conversations and talks with control system platform vendors in order to get FortiEDR, approved for use on their systems.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting, and thank you for doing that, by the way. And Martin, how about you? What was your experience?
Just to complement to what Pat said, one thing we have seen, there is a legacy. We still see Windows XP out there. On the operating system, there is also legacy HMI or control applications, which in many cases they're not even patched. That's a major one that I see. And a lot of systems are still air gap. And as you know, many of the EDR solutions require a cloud connectivity.
Mhm.
We also see that customers might not necessarily have a complete software for their manufacturing environment. And so there is it's kind of difficult to tell, what is the good known applications that we need to allow kind of thing. So I think that's a lot of work has to be done. And the last area is really looking into the vendors, as Pat mentioned. In many cases, they already have a defined technologies, and in many cases, it's still focusing on next gen antivirus kind of technologies.
A lot of traditional antivirus focus from some of the automation and control vendors. Martin, again, there was a little bit of static, so I'm just going to try and summarize what I'm thinking. I'm hearing. I did hear you say legacy operating systems are a challenge. I heard you say that oftentimes the asset owners don't necessarily have a perfect understanding of what processes should be running on these environments. They don't have like a image. Is that right? Did I catch that correctly?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great.
Correct.
Thanks. Yeah, so yeah, those are challenges for sure. And Pat, what you mentioned about even going back to the Ensilo days, pushing your DCS vendors, pushing your automation and control vendors to essentially qualify Ensilo or 40 EDR to work with their solution. It's something we work on all the time to try and make that happen. And it's really when the asset owners ask them to do it that they're most motivated, because the asset owner is their customer, whereas like the security vendor is just another player in the market.
Right, and that was actually the approach that we took.
Mhm.
We have across multiple control system vendors, we have pretty significant footprints, and it was leveraging those footprints to say, hey, this is the direction we want to go, and you need to support it.
Makes sense. And I'm sure there's some variation between the different vendors in terms of how comfortable or ready they are to do that sort of thing. So what are we protecting those endpoints from? Let's talk about the threat. And Rick, we haven't heard much from you yet. I haven't given you the mic at this. I'd like to now. Is it ransomware? Is it insider threat? What are we protecting these endpoints from?
Well, Bill, I've been enjoying listening to Martine and Pat so far. So thanks. Good question, obviously. But, I think stepping back from this for a minute, I'd say what you're really worried about today are the opportunistic activities that are going on. They're characterized as adversarial, bad actors, and whether you're talking about special interest groups that are developing tools, that are targeting specific assets, or criminally motivated activities, or even nation state sponsored activities. It's really all about taking advantage of change in the landscape. We talk about an expanded attack surface. Certainly ransomware and insider attacks are top of mind, but we have to think about the entire digital attack chain. We have to worry about our entire environment. Why? Because it's connected today. We're moving more data than ever, and that data provides opportunities. Of course, that connected infrastructure provides opportunities to gain access to these targets. So I'd say, hey, we're talking about dealing with cyber actors who have certainly a profit motivation. Ransomware has gotten the attention of many. The profits and the numbers and the disruptions are costly as well. The table stakes are high. The losses can quickly mount into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And it also demonstrates an ability to affect stability within a nation, within an environment. It starts to cause public anxiety. We don't have to look beyond some of what we've seen occur in the last 24 months. It illustrates that. Beyond that, I think it's also a continuous testing of the environment. And I think at the national level right now, we're certainly seeing attention from capital here in North America and the United States, as they've amplified the need to protect operational technology for not just in the energy sector, but looking at manufacturing, clearly an area that's chemical manufacturing is a great example, but it extends across, right? It's a very broad perspective. So the one thing we do know is access is the key. And that opportunistic adversary is going to take advantage of innovation, going to take advantage of change that's certainly occurred over the last 2 years. We've had to extend our workforce, extend how we accomplish business. That continues. We're still trying to figure out what that new normal looks like. But the reality is OT didn't get a free pass from having to figure out how to extend the workforce beyond the premise. So that continues to be an issue. And of course, those adversaries love to take advantage of tradecraft and repurpose it. And when you talk about OT and manufacturing, you're certainly talking about encountering legacy hardware and software as well. So the range of opportunities is huge. I think it's unfair to just characterize ransomware. I think you have to think beyond that. In fact, I would suggest that ransomware may be the last thing that you happen to see when a campaign's been effective or successful against a particular target.
You've mentioned that in other conversations that you and I have spoken about, you've referred to ransomware as sort of like the calling card, like, hi, I was here. And that's like the last thing that happens after, someone's gotten on site, someone's explored laterally, someone's been exfiltrating data, et cetera, et cetera. It's right.
I would concern myself with understanding where my assets are. I heard already that point mentioned about protecting your assets, understanding your infrastructure, understanding your intellectual property, and that collection of information or physical assets, processes that all distinguish how you do business, and they separate and allow you to be maybe a cut above the competition. But we know today the competition may be sponsoring a campaign to figure out what you're doing.
That's great. Thanks, Rick. So I'll keep going. There's this great report out. We've got the citation below that came out from SANS in their 2021 survey, OT ICS report. This was actually, I have a copy of it right here, put out by Mark Bristow in August. It's a great report, chock full of great information. I recommend all 241 of you who are here with us today, go check it out. What control systems are considered at the greatest risk for compromise? I thought this was an interesting table in the report. They asked respondents to indicate which control system components are considered the greatest risk. And this kind of goes back to the first question we asked. It's a little bit repetitive, but just look at what comes out on the list, right? At the top of the chart, you see engineering, workstations, laptops, calibration test equipment, assets running commercial operating systems, Windows, Unix, Linux. And you see that repeated on the next couple answers: server assets running commercial OS, operator assets running commercial OS. And as you go down the list, I'm looking for PLCs. Yeah, it's way down there at 11%. You see PLCs, right? So, Rick and others, feel free to comment. What are your thoughts on these top three: engineering stations, server assets running commercial OS, and operator assets like HMI? What do you think about that, Rick?
Couple
Does
quick
that
points.
surprise you? Is it like, of course?
Doesn't surprise me. Top of mind, right? We're talking about the focus on trusted assets, right? That being over 50% at the top line shouldn't surprise anybody. In fact, our FortiGuard Labs just produced a report. It's out there for consumption right now that illustrated the threat projection right against this environment. In fact, they pivot and talk about the fact that the adversary today, more than ever, is focusing on things that are kind of unique to OT. The Linux operating system, as an example, the ability to exploit and use past tradecraft to be very successful against targets that have kind of been offline for a while, not thought to be current. You go below that list, you start to look at server assets. And again, it's about trust. It's pivoting to understand the need to both control and recognize that adversarial behavior from the inside, right? Because that's what we're talking about. So those top three should get your attention very quickly because those are large numbers. I'll pivot to my counterparts here to see if they have something else they'd like to add.
I just wanted to mention one thing. I think Rick did a very good job. In terms of for me, it's also not a surprise to see the engineering workstations. You guys know, those are probably the most used devices on a daily basis for troubleshooting purposes. It has all the stack installed for HMI, everything, and it touches a large majority of the devices in the network. In many cases, they might be in a virtualized environment, but we have seen also mobile laptops running around the facility. So I guess the only comment that I have on the report is, one area that we have also seen is new flows. For instance, as customers start adding additional connectivity to the IT that might require a new flow to be established. I think that's another area that we just need to be careful on how that's applied and if the proper controls were set up before that connection is established. So I think that might be down the line where they call about the IT connectivity. But that's a kind of a
Sure.
major threat vector that we see time and again every time we talk to customers.
Martin, that's great insight. May I ask you, would you mind muting your video? I suspect your audio might work better if your video was turned off, just to give your bandwidth more of a audio flavor. And Pat, I want to see if, did you want to chime in on this one too?
Sure. I would definitely agree that, you know, anything running a commercial OS is of concern, most definitely. You know, we've tried to limit to put a limit on and reduce the size, you know, reduce attack surface size and risk by, you know, eliminating the things that you know, common sense kind of things, right? I don't think any of this is, there's no real, you know, there's no real magic to it. There's no mystery to it. You know, you have to take a common sense approach and limit I should say eliminate or at least reduce the size of your attack surfaces, right? You can't, for example, we've, you know, there's no general internet access for any of our HMIs. We don't do any email
Right.
on our HMIs, you know, and just those two things alone reduce your risk significantly. I have
Big
no idea
time.
what the numbers are.
Right.
But
Well, you've certainly curtailed the phishing email link risk, right?
right. Exactly.
At least on those specific systems. The
Right.
one that surprised me here on this list that's down at 5.4% is Plant Historian. I'm surprised by that one because I think of plant historians sitting at like a layer 3, you know, like in Purdue, somewhere closer to the internet stuff, closer to the IT stuff, further from the field device stuff. So a little bit more exposed, but also typically running on commercial OS. Does that resonate, Martin, Pat? Does historian belong down there, or do you think it's because it's like less essential in terms of the whole?
Well, I think it would depend on, you know, what your specific use case is for
Mhm.
historian, right?
Mhm.
If you are using historian primarily for you know, process data collection, read only kinds of things, or are you using historian as a feedback mechanism, maybe to do manufacturing or plant control? Right.
Right. Okay.
Both, you
Yeah.
know, depending on what your use case is, both
Yeah.
are very different conversations.
That makes sense.
And Bill, you know, we have also seen different historian architectures. In many cases, customers might have an enterprise historian, which typically will coexist on the IT side of the network.
Sure.
In many cases,
Sure.
sometimes in the DMZ.
Yep.
And that also might, as you say, is very way removed from the most critical devices in the network.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, let's plow forward ahead. And we have another poll. I love poll time. Okay, so what primary strategy or technology are you using to protect the endpoints in manufacturing? We'll give it a minute. I wish I could play the Jeopardy music. I can't. And I'm not going to sing. But I will stop talking, give everyone a chance to answer this.
You know, just thinking out loud, Bill, looking at the list, I'll frankly be surprised if you don't see a conviction to trying most of those techniques, right, in some combination.
I can't wait to see how the results come in.
That's the environment we live in today, right? There's some cutting edge things we're doing, and there's some traditional best practices that are implemented, you know, from containment to understanding and signature based. You got that whole array. So the only thing that might be an exception today is moving away from traditional antivirus. That's a bit dated. Certainly some of the intelligence services and getting into being, you know, leveraging more actionable intelligence and pivoting towards the industrial side of business has got to be attractive.
Yep. Let's see it. Let's see the results. What do we have? Well, all of the above came
There we
out at the
go.
top, 29%. Don't know came at 17%. That's too bad. We do see traditional antivirus. Oh, so all of the above was 29%. And then after that, traditional antivirus network segmentation tied at 15. This is interesting. Whitelisting, 2%. OT intrusion detection systems, 12%. That one seems to be growing with all of the attention on these, our friends, these folks. And okay, great. So digital transformation initiatives are definitely changing the mix of solutions used in industrial environments. Well, let's face it, most manufacturing environments are going to contain a mix of traditional and modern technologies. So what risks arise when you mix modern technology with legacy technology? For example, is it challenging to find security solutions equipped to handle the variety of operating systems? I have other thoughts, but Pat, why don't you lead us on this one? What risks arise when you mix modern technology with legacy technology?
Well, certainly, I mean, given the fact that industrial control systems typically have very long life cycles, they're expensive. So, companies don't want to make a refresh investment, every 3 to 4 years, right? Industrial control systems go 7 years, 10 years minimum. So inevitably what you end up with is, newer installations that you have are certainly going to reflect more modern types of operating systems and such. And you're still going to have, those systems that have been sitting around for, 10 years. So they're going to be legacy, quite possibly even out of support types of operating systems. This was one of the key factors that had driven us in the direction of 40 EDR at the time, was that 40 EDR supported everything from Windows XP right up through the latest version of Windows 10. It actually surprised me at how many other vendors did absolutely nothing with legacy OS, for example. If you weren't completely modern in your fleet, you're out of luck. And 40 EDR was among the only platforms that allowed us to deal with the full range of what we had in the environment.
Well, that's a great one. I appreciate that, Pat. I appreciate you mentioning the support on 40 EDR going all the way back to Windows XP. Same thing with Windows Server 2003, I think,
Yep.
2003 or so, and legacy versions of Linux going back 15 years as well. Yeah, that's been a big focus on our side to be relevant in the OT space. But I don't want to take up too much
I would call
advertising.
I would call it a prerequisite.
Yeah, it's a
to be
requirement.
relevant in the OT space.
I agree. I think it's a requirement because so many heritage systems are going to remain on those unsupported OSs for a long time. Martin, did you want to add a comment on this too?
Yes, I wanted to put a kind of a different perspective out there, and this is basically because when customers are faced or end users faced with legacy and new technologies on the OT environment, clearly that defines a different strategy to secure those devices. So you cannot apply the same strategy across the board. And in some cases, believe it or not, for legacy, to secure legacy devices, we even, back in those days, have to put glue on the USB ports, or even lock, like there were situations where the only control that we could apply to those things was, let's put it behind a door with a big lock. And,
right.
And this is the only person who has the key. And is, air gap and everything. So I guess the major risk that I will see is that the strategy to approach will have to be different. And many times customers don't have the support, especially for legacy systems, to apply the proper strategies to secure the environment as well.
That's right. That's right. Thanks. Rick, did you want to add a comment too?
Well, well, this is a complex domain, but when we talk about legacy technology, I always go back to my past life, and it's all about access and getting on target. And so I'm going to take advantage of whatever holes are there. If it's an update right in a process, that may be an opportunity for me to get payload on, and I'll take advantage of that. It may seem old-fashioned to think that way, but again, as the adversary, it's all about gaining access. And I'm going to use whatever technique or tactic is available to me. And I will go back to things that have worked years ago that might work now, because we have connected an environment that may historically have had pockets that were just simply separated and were much harder to get on, right? I might have had to do some social engineering or accomplish building confidence in an insider to get on target. That's simply not the case today in 2021. So I think we have to be mindful of that as we move forward. We also have to think about the increase in the dependence of connected devices. We've talked about that, but the reality is today, we've got to be able to characterize and be able to trust every single asset that comes on board. And we're going to talk about that more in a minute, so I won't jump too far ahead.
Okay, great. That's a good one. So let me jump ahead. How should manufacturing organizations approach resolving this challenge? Right. So if it ain't broke, why fix it? How do we balance that legacy and modern technology integration challenge? We need an endpoint detection response solution, but what do we do? Martin, let's go to you. You're in the hot seat.
About that.
There we go.
Many times what we do is to look into really understanding that approach is in terms of getting a good visualization of the environment, a good understanding what's in the environment. Many times there are isolated networks, legacy devices. There is a bunch of different things involved. And people, sometimes they don't even have an asset inventory, like a comprehensive asset inventory. Even if they have an asset inventory, they don't understand what is the criticality of those devices. Sometimes we recommend to do what we call the centrality analysis, to really understand network centrality analysis, which is really to understand what are kind of the big talkers in the network, which eventually, if they get an antivirus, those will be a virus, that will be the big spreaders of the disease or the virus, let me put it that way. So it's important to really understand their environment, and also have an idea of what they have in place and what are the use cases, as might have been Rick or Pat who mentioned. It's really all about, how are they deploying and employing the technology in their specific environments, and what are the risks that they are facing because of how the system was deployed.
Thank you, Martin. And Pat, how about you? Did you want to add a comment?
Let's move on, Bill.
You got it. We've got 2 more questions, and then we'll go to the Q&A coming in from the audience. I'm thrilled to see a number of questions there. 10 questions I see in the Q&A. I'm all excited to look at them. I haven't been able to look at them yet, but what solution strategy is needed to improve endpoint detection and response in manufacturing environments? And Rick, how about you start on the solution thought?
Wow, this is a tough one. I'm going to just say a couple of things that I think are key in 2021 and beyond. Is that we have to think about platform-based approaches that embrace more of an ecosystem approach. And I say that because, there's a dependence often in most industries on what's already been put out there. And you may have an array of point solutions, but those point solutions aren't working together. We need to have a cohesive architecture that provides us the ability to do pre-event detection. We have to leverage actionable intelligence to derive, and we derive that based on behavioral analysis. That sounds like it's all science, but it's not. That collection today is understood. We're using next generation firewalls to govern and do process overview and enforce rules. It's simply taking up and anteing up just a little higher. If we're going to overcome and break that attack chain, we have to understand what it looks like from the point of reconnaissance all the way to C2 happening on me as a target. So it's a cross-cutting challenge, Bill. We've got to understand our increase in the dependence on the endpoints. It's going to continue to grow. So if we're going to tackle that, it requires a proportional investment to be able to, one, recognize that expanded attack surface, but then be able to enforce earned trust.
Right.
That trust is really, really important here. Whether you're talking about an application, an asset, a client access, it's all about insisting on that trust. So we can be talking about role-based access in one moment, segmentation and containment in another, but it's all about limiting the ability of an adversary to accomplish their mission once they're on target.
Right on. My thoughts on this one are, when you have a platform, the platform vendor takes on the role of integrating the various aspects of the platform. When you don't have a platform, you take on integrating the various point solutions you use, either you or a solution integrator, a system integrator. And the challenge becomes, there's a new version of this. Is it going to break the compatibility? What's going to happen with the shim code you put in there to make this thing work with that thing, right? If you have a platform that can provide multiple aspects of a solution, you don't have to worry about it because they have to worry about it. It becomes part of their product and their solution space. And furthermore, a platform with a rich ecosystem does that even beyond their own, four walls, metaphorical four walls, into their partners, right? So platforms with rich ecosystems bring in a tremendous amount of relief from the asset owner having to deal with making things work together. And that's it. That's the value proposition of the platform right there.
It also helps me to characterize the delta difference, Bill, the before and the after. There's so much going on dynamically that I need to be able to characterize from moment to moment what's changing within my environment. And it's not a human problem.
It's a configuration management.
Yeah, there are layers to how you're going to accomplish this
Right.
across your stack. But you have attention to detail and understanding those small behaviors that allows me to be a little more proactive, right? And sensing that something's going on, and may not be adversarial, but if I treat them all the same, it at least allows me to be more resilient in understanding the level of integrity within my environment from moment to moment.
How about you, Martin? Did you want to add to that, the platform solution strategy thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of additional points. The first one is obviously to look into a platform that is going to meet the requirements of your use case or environment. For example, as Pat mentioned before, legacy operating systems, for instance. The second thing is, if you are air gap, you will need to look into a solution that will support installing the server components into your environment, not residing in the cloud. So that's kind of the first aspect that I will say. The second area is the solution also should be capable, because what we're putting together in this case is to have a solution that is going to help us to alert of incidents so that we can react quickly to events. So the solution should have some sort of a playbooks kind of automation built into it, so that it will respond automatically to specific situations, and even isolate an endpoint, or maybe put it into a specific group. The forensics team can actually go and do the proper investigation and decide whether this is a malware, or maybe is a SCADA system that the system is believing that's a malware. And the third area, as you mentioned, it's critical to have integration, and especially with the ticketing systems like ServiceNow or others, so that your incident response team automatically gets notification, or even the SOC team that you might have in place gets notification directly into what's going to happen, and they properly route the case and provide the proper mitigation to it. So those are the three areas that I believe people will have to look into define when they start identifying these kind of solutions for them.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Martin. I appreciate you mentioning the orchestration and response part, right? Having that automatable aspects, right? So that the alert flows into something where someone else can pick it up. Otherwise, it's a blinking light in a box that maybe no one sees.
And people are not looking at the console per se 24/7. So there has to be some level of automation to take care of the basic incident.
Okay, this is our final question. Thank you for your thoughts, everybody. Final question before we go to the general Q&A. One of the challenges we often hear from manufacturing leaders is the need to justify the investment for digital security, right? Businesses look for value. Value comes from something that brings revenue, something that lowers cost, something that lowers risk. How do you quantify the ROI around these things? How do you articulate the need for tools that protect manufacturing endpoints, so leaders understand the importance of the investment. And I feel like candidly, this is actually a big challenge for OT. OT secure people who think about OT security are not used to articulating the need for budget. I think that's changing. Budget for security specifically. And so any way we can share thoughts on how to make that articulation for an internal stakeholder to understand the importance, I think it's worth spending some time on that. So Martin, do you want to kick us off on this one, and then Rick and Pat to close out?
You know, I will say that obviously, like any other solution or technology, there is some cost involved. So understand the total cost of ownership, not just the cost of buying the software and the hardware and installing it, but also the cost of sustaining the system longer term. I think that's a primary analysis that has to be done. But on top of that, going back to the benefits, I will say that time is actually the most critical benefit that you get with these kind of solutions. When I refer to time is, look at from the perspective of, if you were to have identify an incident that you can contain very quickly. If you don't have this kind of visualization or monitoring your networks, you know, a virus may be in your environment for many months and not necessarily you realize of that situation. So what is the value of detecting ransomware at the ingress point in your environment? What is the value that you can put into quickly resolving and mitigating the incident? So that's what I will say. And just to kind of wrap up on this is, you know, going back to, okay, what is the benefit in total if you get attacked? And many times, I mean, we only see what's in the headlines, but there are a lot of attacks that go unreported. People don't report, yeah, you just got this specific incident into my environment, I paid this specific ransom. And that could be the area that we might want to look into. You know, what are the hidden costs of getting an incident? You know, the bad publicity, not having a proper mitigation plan to recover, those kind of things. And I will say that's probably what has to be put in place to make people aware that having these kind of solutions, even though they might represent an initial outspend in terms of deploying them, longer term, they'll have a better visualization and they will respond more quickly into whatever incidents they might try to get into their environments.
Thank you, Martin. That's great. And Rick, did you want to close us out? We have 4 minutes before we have to end. So
you know, I have thoughts on this, Bill. It's interesting. You're right. In 2021, there's a lot of pressure on the executive to understand and get their hands around what it means to demonstrate readiness, response and readiness. Recovery plans that have been executed and tested. That's coming off of Capitol Hill right now. A lot of pressure in key areas of the manufacturing industry. So we know that that's top of mind. I think if you were to pick one point, I'd say understand the consequence of failure. The consequence of failure is going to drive you to have to make smart investments.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, to think about, you know, not just a well thought out risk assessment, but understanding and working with the engineers who really truly understand the environment. They're some of the smartest people in the room because they understand behaviorally the dependence on the technologies across the stack and can tell you where you really ought to be spending your time. So from risk to vulnerability to understanding the likelihood of an attack and what it'll yield from a success point of view becomes really important across the IT and OT enterprise. We don't have to look beyond oil and gas as a great example of that here from this last year.
Great example. That's a great example, Rick. And Pat, did you want to add a thought?
Yeah, sure. You know, for anybody that works at a publicly traded company, you know, there's always a lot of worry of negatively impacting stock price, right?
Right.
And you know, to get to how what Rick had just mentioned, which I thought was a very elegant way of stating it. You know, to me, it's also a little bit of cost avoidance, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Understanding the consequences of bad things that happen and avoiding those costs, right? It wasn't very long ago in the was it the Verizon acquisition of Yahoo, big Yahoo compromise, and it was, you know, it affected that deal by hundreds of millions of dollars,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a
That's a
huge,
great example. It's a great
right?
example.
That's a huge delta in selling and buying price in that deal because there was a malware attack in between.
Right. So reputational, the risk of reputational harms also worth quantifying in any kind of analysis around this. That's great. All right, we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to jump into the Q&A section. So that means I'm putting the Q&A slide up, and I'm pulling up the Zoom Q&A panel. I don't know if that's screen shares or not. Does that? Can you all panelists
Yep.
you can see the Q&A questions?
Yeah, no, I just see the panel. I don't see the questions.
Oh, interesting. All right. So in that case, I'm just going to read them. So, and I'm not going to read the names of the people who asked the questions, partly because of privacy considerations and partly because I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce them correctly. So we'll just use initials. JZ asks, what is an optimal IIoT security architecture?
Ooh, boy, that's a loaded question. Um, and one that probably we could spend the rest of the afternoon discussing, right? I think again, common sense things to do. Figure out what your biggest attack surfaces are, and then take the appropriate steps to reduce those. Get your HMIs direct, get them off the internet. If it's at all possible, eliminate email on it, because like we said, that's that directly removes the phishing attack vector.
Eliminate email from the OT
Correct.
systems.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things.
Those are good. Those are good best practices. Rick,
Sure.
did you?
Yeah, Bill, I just got to add one thing. And no matter how hard, and yeah, we got to do those smart moves that Pat just characterized. There's some things we can nominally do, but the reality is nothing's perfect, right? The dynamic nature of today's environment says somebody's going to bring in their own device. Someone's going to accomplish something. Whether they should or not doesn't matter. They are. It will happen. In the event that it occurs, we have to be out in front of that and prepared. Today, it's really about being proactive instead of reactive, because the cost to pivot otherwise is too high. But being able to recognize at the earliest possible point that something is occurring at the HMI, and it may be that the operator is having a bad day, or maybe they've lost their credentials and someone is masquerading. We don't know, but we need to be able to pay attention to that, analyze it, contain it, and be able to move forward safely, because in operational technology, right, the abiding principle is safe and continuous business. If we breach that one, we've lost.
Perfect. That's a good one. I mean, my thoughts on this one are sort of pragmatic. Pick a framework, assess your security posture, and figure out, where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, maturing yourself in your cyber maturity journey in the context of that framework. And the framework you pick is going to be totally context dependent, what region you're in, what industry you're in, right? NIST offers a great framework, so, and there are others, but defense in depth is key, and you're going to need a multitude of solutions working together.
That's the approach that I personally prefer, right? Simple things, multiple technologies, anti-malware, et cetera, segmentation with firewalls running UTM, lay tripwires all across your environment. You don't rely on any one particular technology, right? The more tripwires that you put out there, the likelier it is that if there is an intrusion, somebody will find one of those tripwires before it's too late.
Pat, I got to say, marketers got to market, and what you just said has prompted a thought on my side. You and I need to catch up on 40 Deceptor.
Yes.
We won't do that now, but I do want to follow up with you on that. All right. Next one from DH. How have cloud-based tools influenced or changed how endpoint protection is achieved in OT environments? And Martin, I thought you might want to answer this one.
Sure. That's a great question. As we have seen a lot of cloud making it into the OT environments, especially for new IoT sensors or devices, or even connectivity to mobile devices. But I guess, it's really going back to what is the kind of architecture that you have in your environment. Do you have an on-prem installation, meaning air gap installation that may require to have an on-prem? I think that kind of influence how the architecture you'll have. But in terms of cloud, we have seen actually some customers moving their supervisory or SCADA systems into the cloud. And that will obviously make it even more interesting for some of the EDR systems that support cloud environments only. But as I'm going back and mention again, is what is specifically the use case that you have, and what is the architecture that you have currently in place?
Well, that is a great point, Martin. I want to point out, and it's distributed nature of where we're going, but it also opens Pandora's box to other things. If I'm aware of your dependence and the fact that you've deployed those capabilities out into the cloud, it opens yourself up to a distributed denial of service attack, right? I'm going to go after you there. I may try and cripple you by simply getting in and subverting your dependence on that cloud. But the reality is, right, we continue to move more data, more intelligence, more information off-prem. So that trend's going to continue. So we have to be resilient in that regard, whether we're talking about public, private, or hybrid configurations. I think we have to really think about how we're conducting business, how we expect to be able to count on those assets, be able to execute our businesses safely and continuously.
Okay. This next question is a bit technical. It comes from KB, who asks, how, and if, I'm not sure that the panelists are going to have a good answer for this one. I know I don't, but I'd be interested to see what the panelists think. How important do you think is hardware root of trust, small TCB, and measuring your firmware/software, especially on the OT endpoints? Anyone have a point of view?
I wouldn't.
Chime in this.
Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
No, I just wanted to quickly mention that, I will say it all depends, because we have seen if the ICS vendors don't have a good supply chain security in place, sometimes they source processors or small parts from different companies. Right. And if they're not looking into, how is that firmware version flashed? Is that being flashed with the right version from the right source, or somebody had the opportunity to influence? And we have seen attacks where attackers actually have upload into the ICS vendors. Remember the Havix attack? They were actually influenced, and they actually upload software into the ICS vendors. So I will say that it really depends into what is the security supply chain that your vendors have in place, and if that's something that you rely on. But even nevertheless, there is also a use case depending on how you're using the technology. At the end of the day, for instance, if you have an environment where people come in and plug in USB ports into your nodes, and you are not checking if they have any virus or anything in place, you eventually are affecting at a higher levels of the application, not necessarily at the lowest level of the operating system or the firmware version.
That's great. That's thoughtful. I have a thought, but before I share it, anyone else?
I think it's going to be context sensitive, right?
Yep.
Everybody's individual use case. In mine, firmware and things like that are definitely a concern. I don't want to discount or diminish that it would be a concern, but for the most part, I would have larger things to worry about.
Right. Yeah. And coming from the background where I've been, I was at a company that made, controls architectures that had some of these capabilities. What I would say is and this is opinion, it's opinion, right? But I'm not aware of what industries are people going to rip out the controls that they have so that they can put in new controls that have these capabilities, right? I think the controls vendors are going to be adding these kinds of capabilities into their products going forward as they continue to mature their products, as they compete with one another on points of differentiation around security. And so I think over time, we'll see these capabilities make their way into assets, particularly hardware root of trust, firmware, software attestation, code signing. All of these things are great ideas in terms of making a more secure control environment. And maybe some industries will rip out their controls architectures to put in new stuff that have these capabilities, or maybe it'll just happen when 20 years has gone by, right? So that's kind of how I think about it. There's a question here I wanted to ask. There, in some of the questions I'm skipping around a little bit, but this one sort of at the bottom from TL. How difficult and time consuming is it to run an EDR solution? And so, we have experts here familiar with this, right? Pat and Martin have done it, right? So Pat does it at Lindy. Martin's implemented them at NTT. Would love to hear your thoughts. How difficult and time consuming was it to, implement, set up? What are some of the considerations when you're setting it up and also running it?
I wouldn't say it was click, 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 done. But I also don't think that it was, it wasn't, I wouldn't call it onerous either. I think in terms of platform architecture, you want to be aware that there is a latency sensitivity between EDR collector endpoints and the parts of the back end infrastructure. So network latency, and I mean for me that was a huge consideration. I mean, Lindy is a global company, operating across almost every single country in the world. So we're very distributed, and that distribution is very much affected by network quality, particularly wide area network quality. So network latency is a consideration. I think the product itself is relatively simple. I think more simple than any traditional antivirus product that I've worked with. At least that's how I see it. And after that, just a matter of really getting a feel for the product and how it actually works. One thing that I wish was a little bit better was it gives you the EDR product gives you an incredible insight as to what is going on in your endpoints. Sometimes I would hazard to say sometimes maybe too much. Right.
So just on the management of the information flowing back into the management system side.
Exactly. For example, I from time to time I will see an alert complaining about net services, right? And that alert would not come along with better detail of, okay, what was the application or what was the process running that ultimately got me to or SVC host on a Windows box is what I'm talking about, right? So I would get an alert about that, but sometimes the information regarding what the lead up was, right? So, user was running blah, blah, blah application, which, triggered, or maybe even WSUS. WSUS is good for this, the Windows Update platform. An alert comes in and it doesn't quite give you enough background sometimes, I think.
Okay.
To be able to make, I mean, at the end of the day, your job as the platform administrator is to make a decision. Okay, is this alert, good software acting poorly?
Yep.
Or is it something that I need to be worried about?
Right. That's helpful. Well, listen, I appreciate everyone's time. I'm getting some cues from the organizers and puppet masters behind the curtain of this event, telling me that it's time to close the show, or at least this session. So again, I want to thank Pat and Martin and Rick for joining me on the panel and all the questions that came in. Really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to be here with you all today. And
It's my pleasure.
we hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Take care all. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.